Hey, what's up? I'm Jason, and today we're going to answer a very important question that I see come up all the time, and that's can you be a self taught game developer? Or really just a self taught programmer in general? Or do you need to go to college? Do you need to get a 4 year or 6 year degree to be a game developer? Well, I think the short of the answer is no, but I want to go into really what the differences are, what the benefits of going either way are, and then talk about the process for becoming a self taught developer. And we're going to end it, or go probably about halfway in. We're going to dive into a bunch of tips on how you can become a better developer. So, things that you can do if you are a self taught developer that really helps, stuff that really helped me, especially. And then I think they also apply to if you're not self taught. In fact, I've seen them apply and work great for my friends who did go get a professional CS degree or a game development degree. So let's get started with some of the differences. Before we do that, though, I want to briefly mention that I am a self taught game developer. At least that's what I would consider myself. My professional training is all in electronics, and I did a tiny little bit of assembly language programming in college, but 0% of what I learned in school applies to anything that I've done in the last, I don't know, 15 to 20 years. All of my game development stuff has been learned almost on demand, and we're going to talk about what that process looks like. But again, before we do, I also want to mention go hit the like button and the share button. And if you have thoughts on this process while I'm going through it, or if you're like a self taught developer and you think it's great, or maybe you think I'm crazy and everybody should go to college, drop a comment down below and let's just have a little discussion. I'm kind of curious to see what everybody thinks about this. So let's now finally, after my third transition there, dive into some of the differences between becoming a self taught developer and, well, learning in school. I think the first one is really just about speed because when you're learning in school, there's a lot that you have to cover, right? If you go to a traditional college, at least in the United States, what you're going to do is spend probably the first 2 years learning things that aren't extremely relevant to your career. You're not going to be you're going to be learning things like economics, English, writing, probably a bunch of math too. The math part could be a little bit related, but it's still not super important I'll talk more about that as we get further on. Math is important, but it's not a key part of it. And the stuff that you're going to learn in college is probably not going to relate too much to 95% of your work. It'll relate in a little tiny bit. But you're going to spend a lot of time learning not a lot of information, at least in my experience. And that's because when you go to school, they generally teach towards the average student there, or sometimes even towards the slowest student. So things get slowed down quite a bit. The amount of information that you go through is not always a lot. I mean, I've met a lot of programmers with master's degrees who were unable to code at all. Like they couldn't write a simple program because they talked a lot about theory, they talked a lot about other things, and they never actually got to writing code. Or they had tiny little portions, like they'd spend 4 or 6 years in college and they'd spent maybe 3 months doing a class where they actually write code. And often it was very simple code in a language that was totally irrelevant. Now, that doesn't apply to all schools. There are definitely some schools out there that are great that are going to teach you how to code and get you started on coding right away. But I think it's really hard from the outside to know which schools those are and to get a good understanding of, am I going to learn a lot? Am I going to learn the things that I need? Or am I just mostly working for this certification or this paper or proof that I can at least finish school and understand the fundamentals? Which is one area that I think that self-taught game developers tend to struggle with. And that's the more theoretical, fundamental stuff. Things like big O notation or just performance characteristics or data structures and algorithms. But those aren't things that you necessarily need to go to school for. In fact, there's a really good book, The Imposter's Handbook. I would go check that out. If you are a self-taught developer, I know I'm kind of skipping ahead, but if you are self-taught or you're just kind of considering, hey, maybe I want to get into programming, I'm not really sure, I don't know what these classes are going to be like, go check out that book. It'll teach you, I think, quite a bit about a lot of the fundamentals and a lot of the things that you would learn in those intro college courses on computer science. Now, it's important to note, though, that even if you do go through a traditional program, you still need to be very self-driven, I think, to be a successful game developer or programmer in general. Because what you're going to learn in school or outside of school is going to matter a lot on how much effort you put into it and the kinds of things that you try to learn. It's very easy to just go through school and get a degree without actually learning very much, just doing the bare minimum, getting the assignments turned in, doing the little bit of project work that you have to do, and not really pushing yourself. When you're working on self-teaching, though, it shows a lot more when you're not self-driven, because if you're not self-driven, you're not even getting that little paper. You're not getting the little, I guess, fake endorphin rush of, hey, I'm still accomplishing something, even if all I did was kind of sleep through the class. Going to a class and sitting there and not absorbing anything and not really utilizing and remembering that information isn't valuable at all. Again, you can get great information from going to a good school and the right instructors, but if you're not paying attention and you're not really putting that information to work, it's very easy to forget things. In fact, it's extremely easy to learn things, especially when it comes to tech and programming, and then completely forget about them next week. If you're not using the things, it's very easy to just kind of let those slip right out of your head. Now, when you're self-teaching, I find that happens quite a bit, I guess a lot less often. And the reason for that is that you usually, when you're self-teaching, you're teaching yourself to go solve a problem. You have a very specific problem, like I need to figure out how to move this character. I need to figure out how to make this jump different, or whatever the thing is that you need to solve that you're trying to figure out for the game that you're working on or the project you're working on. You're going in and you're looking at the info to figure out exactly how to solve that, and then you're using it. You're using that information, and it's going to kind of bake into your brain. At least that's the way that it works for me, and I think it works that way for a lot of other people. Now, before I get into the process of how you start to become a self-taught developer and dive into tips on how to be a better self-taught developer, just a better developer in general, I want to talk about whether or not you can be as good as a traditionally taught programmer. And I think that probably from the beginning of this, you may have inferred that you definitely can. In fact, I'd say that most of the really great programmers I know don't even have a CS degree. They never went to college to learn game development or programming. In fact, most of them just started off as teenagers, hacking around, trying to figure out how to make a mod or a plugin for something. They found a need that they wanted to fill. They wanted to make their own game or modify their own game, and they just started working on it. They started looking for solutions and found them. So let's talk about the process. If you want to become a developer and you don't necessarily want to go to school, or you're not sure you're ready to make that jump yet, what can you do to become a self-taught developer? Well, I already talked briefly about modding games, and I think that that's a really good starting point to just find a game that you find interesting, that you like to play. Like my 11-year-old really likes to play Minecraft. He likes to change the way things work, so he goes in there and mods. Now, he's obviously not a programmer per se, but he's doing actual code writing. He's finding little hooks. So you'll get a little method in there where you can override something or change the behavior of something, and he'll go in there and add in a little bit of extra functionality. Again, it's mostly just little fluff stuff, but he's getting used to the process and the flow, and he's also, more importantly, finding out how to learn these things on his own. He has a problem. It's like, hey, I want to figure out how to do this. And I never just tell him, hey, this is exactly how you do it. Say, hey, well, this is what you might want to search for. Go look this up and tell me if you can find it. If you can't find it, let me know and I'll come help you out. But most of the time, I just kind of send him off to go do a little bit of self or slightly, just barely guided learning, where he's got an idea of the problem that he wants to solve and he goes out and finds the solution. And this is exactly what you want to do on your own, right? So I would recommend starting with a game engine. Don't try to build your own game engine. Obviously, from this channel, if you've seen anything else I do, you know that I prefer Unity. It's just my favorite engine. I've worked with quite a few of them, but Unity I think is a great engine to start with too, because C# is a very approachable language. And start with a small project. So get a engine that you want to use, pick whichever one you want, and first go through a couple little tutorials. Don't just start by going, hey, I want to make a game. I'm going to grab this engine. I'm going to go make a game. It's not going to work. You're going to have a hard time. You're going to struggle. It's probably going to fail. Instead, I'd say start with a couple very small tutorials to get yourself used to the engine, get yourself kind of used to the workflow, and understand what everything means. Like when you get into Unity or Unreal, there's a lot to learn just in what the editor means. I still struggle when I open up things like Maya. I look around like, oh man, I'm overwhelmed with all this stuff because I never really spent the time to dive into it. If you jump into something like Unity or Unreal, you're going to have the same problem. You're going to see all of these windows, all of these controls everywhere. And usually what people will do is just go in and start building out a terrain because it's nice and simple and fun. Like they build out a level and start imagining a game, never get around to building a game. So what I would do is first, I guess, jump into the engine, play around a little bit, look around, and then dive right into very simple tutorials. Learn how to make the simplest mobile games possible. I generally recommend people start with something like Flappy Bird because the functions or the functionality of that game is extremely simple. You can jump and pipes move. That's it. There's nothing else to the game. You don't have to add any other extra complexity. There's not a lot of, I guess, hard stuff to figure out. And it's the kind of thing that I've taught to fifth graders multiple times and they all seem to understand it. So it's something that's easy to start with. And I would do that a couple times. I recommend that people build probably 3 or 4 little mini games before they try to dive into creating something that's, I'd say, their own. Don't start with your own idea, your own project. Start with little things that are relatively different. Don't build like Flappy Bird and then another slightly different Flappy Bird. Build Flappy Bird and then do like a Doodle Jump or some other type of simple little game. Actually, Doodle Jump's probably a little bit too complicated to start off. Start off with really, really simple things and build them to get familiar and comfortable with the engine. Once you're done with that, though, it's important to do quite a few other things. The first is to deploy that game out. I mean, if you can ship it and release it to the asset store, or not the asset store, like the Play Store or the iOS store or something, that's awesome. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that you go all the way to those stores, though. Just do a deployment onto your phone or to a WebGL build. In Unity, it's actually extremely simple. You can watch a 10-minute video and learn how to deploy your game that you've just built onto a web page and then publish it and share it with other people. Don't expect that a lot of people are going to play it, but just know that you're going to be able to go through that process. You'll be able to say, hey, I've deployed some games before and I understand what the process is like. And it's a lot easier to get that process down with a very simple game when you're just starting out than it is when you're building these big giant projects and then going, oh wait, I don't even know if I can do this. So I'd say deploying it out is very important, but not just for those reasons of being able to say that, hey, I did this either. It's also a big motivator. When other people see what you've done, they generally get impressed. Even if you build crappy little games, if it's not a little kid, they're probably going to be like, hey, wow, that's pretty cool. I didn't know you could do that. That's a really neat thing. And I think it helps to motivate people. It helps to motivate me when people play my stuff. So I can imagine that it helps with everybody else. And everybody I talk to really just like, we like building games because we want other people to play them. We want other people to enjoy them. And even if they're a simple, crappy little clone, maybe we've added our name or something or changed out the character with ourselves or some other random picture that we found, that's enough to really, I think, build up some motivation. And then it also gives you some feedback, right? People will play your stuff and go, hey, can you do this? And then, like, can you make this little change? Like, you're in Flappy Bird, you're like, hey, can you add enemies that you shoot at? And you go, hey, I don't know, maybe I can. Let me see if I can figure that out and go through that process, which is, again, where you get into that self-driven, self-learning stuff, where you're going to start searching for information, try out different implementations and answers, and figure out what actually works. Now, I also want to point out that when you're getting started and you're learning on your own, or you're not learning on your own, you're fresh out of college, don't expect your code to be perfect. It's going to be, I would say, bad, right? Almost nobody has good code out of college or just when they're starting out. Everybody writes really bad things. Everybody does things in really inefficient and sloppy ways. I don't think it's that important to get it perfect right at the beginning. It's much more important to make it work and get the functionality in there. Get the project complete or get your little game complete and get it out. And then you can worry about making it right and faster later. You really need to go through the process of building multiple things and seeing the pain and the downsides to having what I would call sloppy code. And you have to really go through that before you understand the value of having good, clean code. So I wouldn't worry too much about clean code right at the beginning. Just worry about getting your thing done, get it working, and figure out different ways to get it working. Also, don't feel afraid to just copy and paste some code. I know that generally it's frowned upon to go, hey, look, I just copied this method and pasted it over. I have no idea how it works. It's great if you can copy and paste it over and understand how it works. But if you don't get how it works, don't just sit there and get stuck on it forever. It's really easy to just kind of dig yourself into a hole going, I don't know how this works, so I don't want to use it, or I'm confused. Just get the code in there that works and then try to figure it out if you can. If you can't, when you're getting started out, I wouldn't worry too much. You're going to learn it eventually. And then, a year or two down the road, you're going to look at that code and be like, oh, I totally get it now. I totally understand what that was. I'm surprised like how much I've learned or how I didn't realize that back in the day. All right, now I promised you some tips on how to become a better game developer, whether you're self-taught or going to college. And it's time for that now. So let's start with the first one, which is you need to find a community. This could be meetups or user groups or just a group of friends that you have, or even an online community. Everybody who's got a YouTube channel on game development has a Discord server, myself included. I'll put a link down below. Just join as many of those as you can and find the one that works well for you, where you get along with people and you find people who have similar interests and I'd say close to a similar skill level, maybe slightly above you, that you can learn from and bounce ideas off of and ask questions. A lot of the time we come up with these problems in our head and we're like, hey, I want to do this big, giant, complicated thing, not realizing that there's a really simple solution for it already out there. And we overcomplicate it and overthink these things. And you just ask somebody else, they can point you usually like right in the right direction of the nice, simple, easy to use answer and I'd say the best way to do it. So you definitely want to have this kind of a community. Have some group that you reach out to. Again, if you don't like Discord, you want to just talk to other people in person, I would say look for user groups. Meetup.com is a great place for it. But most places have them somewhere in their area. Of course, if you're out far, then online may be the only option. The next thing, or the second tip, I guess, is to read some books on programming in general. This isn't necessarily on game development. I would look at books on programming, on C#, on, let's see, clean code practices as you're getting, assuming you're building a little bit and you're kind of at that beginner to intermediate level, start reading books like Clean Code. Start watching Uncle Bob's videos on YouTube. He talks a lot about just how to optimize your code, how to write good, clean code that's maintainable and manageable and doesn't become a mess. And he does a lot of those examples in C#. The third tip here is to actually listen to coding or development podcasts. I know a lot of people don't like podcasts or just, don't like audio in general, but I think that it's a really good, really important way to learn. And you're not going to always learn about things that are relevant to the problem that you're having. In fact, I think of podcasts a lot more like going to a random college lecture. You're going to learn about something that may or may not be related to something that you're doing, but a lot of the time what it does is it opens your eyes to things that you would have never even thought to learn about. Now, I don't just listen to game development podcasts. I like to listen to a lot of just C# and .NET and programming podcasts because I find out about all kinds of new developments and new technology. I find out about new C# features, about the new frameworks that are coming out, even things that are mostly unrelated like web stuff. I learn a lot about that along the way, which helps me get web jobs if I ever needed one, right? But it also helps me learn about new techniques and ideas that people have. But also a lot of the time I'll just learn actionable stuff. I'd say probably 1 out of 4 podcasts that I listen to, I figure out or learn something actionable. In fact, if you're curious about learning Big O notation or some of that stuff from that Imposter's Handbook, I'd go check out the Coding Blocks podcast. It's a great podcast. I love listening to those guys. And they actually do like full reviews on a lot of these books where they'll talk about all of the different parts of the book, what they found interesting, what they learned from it, and the things that you should probably take away from them. So if you're not big onto reading and you happen to do a lot of driving, I'd say podcasts are an amazing way to learn. Also, you can just listen to podcasts while you're playing games, doing other stuff, working on code, working or whatever other job you've got. So podcasts are a great source for this kind of stuff. The fourth tip, and I think this is probably the most important one, is to practice every day. Now, obviously, every day is sometimes not possible, but every day that you can, practice just by writing a little bit of code. You don't have to write a lot, but you're going to find a big difference between if you write code once a week versus if you write code every single day. It's going to become a habit. It's going to become something that becomes a lot more natural. And I think this is the case for just about any skill that you could learn, right? If you practice basketball every day, you're going to be a whole lot better at basketball than you are if you practice once a week, right? And if you practice twice a day, you're going to become even better. I'd also recommend, if you can, practice early in the morning. I don't know how true it is, but I've seen a lot of studies and a lot of people talk about just how much better it is to learn earlier in the morning and how that stuff retains in your head. Personally, I like to do a little bit in the morning and a little bit at night. So like as I'm getting started up, I'll try to learn something new in the morning, and then near the end I'll try to revisit that thing. Obviously I don't do it perfectly, but I write code all day too, and I figured that's a lot of practice. So if you're writing code constantly, great. But if you're writing code that's very similar and the same all the time, and you want to actually learn new stuff, find new problems in the morning and solutions to those. One great way to do this, by the way, which I guess we could go on to as tip number 5, is check out some code katas. They're really simple little problems that you solve by writing code. It's a good way to figure out solutions and algorithms and just get better at writing code in general by going through these problems. Like a very simple one would be like a tic-tac-toe one, where you're writing a simple tic-tac-toe game, and you just search for code katas. You'll see all kinds of info on them. Look for C# related ones if you're working in Unity, obviously C++ if you go with Unreal, or whatever language you're using in your engine. Also, this shouldn't be a tip. This should really be somewhere earlier, but we're going to call it tip number 6. And that's that if you want to be a game developer, you should learn how to code. I know a lot of people want to be a game developer, but they think like, hey, I don't understand what this code means. I don't want to learn to code. I want to just be a game developer who does all my things visually or has somebody else write my code. And I can understand the fear there. I understand the hesitation when you look at something and it doesn't make any sense. It's like if I open up a Word doc that's in a language I don't understand. Not a programming language, but just like, maybe it's in Hebrew or I don't know, some language that I can't read, right? I'm going to look at it and go, oh, wow, this makes no sense. I don't understand it at all. Luckily, with programming, the language isn't that complicated. It's not nearly as complicated as learning an actual foreign language. You really just have to learn maybe 10 to 20 keywords. So you're thinking like 10 words or so, and then the structure. Other than that, you don't have to learn too much. Obviously, you'll learn more as you go along, but to get used to it and to be able to read code, you don't need to learn too much. In fact, once you can read code in one language, it tends to become a lot easier to read in another language, especially when you're looking at C languages or C-based languages like Java, JavaScript, C#, C++, or just old school C. A lot of those languages, they have very similar structure to how things are laid out, just slightly different keywords and minor tweaks here and there. So let's end this with a quick recap. Can you be a self-taught game developer today? Most definitely. Should you be a self-taught game developer today? I would say so. I am, and I love it. And every self-taught game developer I know seems to really love what they do, and they love their process of learning and how they got better. And like I said, most of them are really, really good developers. It takes a lot of energy, it takes a lot of effort, but the reward is big, the payoff is there. There are a ton of game development or just programming jobs in general out there, and they pay really well compared to most other things. And again, you don't necessarily need to go into a huge amount of debt or spend many, many years learning these things. And let's just talk real quickly about why that is too. Because I know I said I was going to recap, but honestly, I think that the biggest thing that sets aside programming or game development from other careers like being a doctor or an airline pilot or something like that, and makes it so that you can learn this stuff at home, is that you can practice. You can actually go through the process. You can do everything that's required with almost no risk, right? If you're trying to be a doctor and you want to practice medicine, you screw up, somebody gets hurt, somebody dies, right? You don't know what you're doing and you're just kind of guessing and trying to fumble your way through it, searching for information. You're going to do bad things. Same, especially if you try to fly a plane, right? Well, first it's going to cost you a ton to get a plane, and then you're probably going to crash it, which reminds me of that great helicopter video I saw of some guy who didn't want to wait for his first lesson, hopped in and just started flying and flipped his helicopter over. Obviously terrible for him, but it just shows that some of these things you really do need formal training for. You can't just practice on your own because there are risks and dangers. With game development, the worst risk that you have is that you don't finish your game. Second worst is you finish it and nobody likes it. There's no real actual danger. It's just spending your time and you're learning along the way. And again, it's much safer, much easier to do. So you can do it. Now, let's get back to the recap. So yes, you can. Yes, you probably should. Going to college is also a great option if you do your research and make sure that people coming out of that school or in that program that you're looking at are actually finding jobs and that they're learning things. I would talk to some people who've gone through the program, see what kinds of things they learned and how much they know, what kind of things that they're covering, and are they just covering, some old lessons that they put together 15 years ago and hitting fundamentals, or are they talking about modern game development and going through the process and teaching you how to actually build games? Are you actually building games in that process? Make sure that you are, and that you're getting the value out of it. Also, remember to practice a lot and just work with other people. If you can meet with people, go to user groups or anything like that, or talk to them online, or ideally do some pair programming or mob programming, it can be a great option. When it comes to learning online, there are tons and tons of options out there. There are courses available. I've even got my own. There are tons of them on Udemy. There are lots of videos and channels on game development in general and Unity game development specifically. I would say go through some of those tutorials, learn how to make the fundamentals, and slowly start leveling yourself up. All right, that's all I've got for today. I hope this was helpful. If you have questions about it, though, please just drop it down below. I'm going to try to watch the questions for this video for a while and see if I can answer them and try to get some more ideas and maybe do a follow-up here. Also, don't forget to like and share the video, and a special thanks as always to everybody on Patreon. You guys are awesome. And is there anything else? No, I think that's it. Just get out there and start making games. Bye.